The wind howled through the broken streets, carrying the smell of smoke and burnt metal. Somewhere in the distance, buildings cracked and collapsed, sending clouds of dust into the pale yellow sky. The boy's breath came in sharp, painful gasps. He had been running for what felt like hours, his small legs aching, his side burning from the deep cut left by the shrapnel. He didn't know where he was anymore. The village was strange, alien, full of shadows that moved. Behind him, heavy footsteps pounded against the ground. The raiders were close. Their guttural voices echoed off the walls, hunting him like prey. He pressed himself against the cold stone, trying to stay silent, but the pain in his ribs made it hard not to cry. He was only 9 years old, and he was about to die. A sudden hand grabbed his arm. He flinched, thinking it was the enemy, but when he looked, it was a girl. She was maybe a little older than him, with violet skin and bright silver eyes. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled, but her grip was strong. "Come," she whispered in broken standard, tugging him toward a gap in the rubble. He didn't know why he followed her. Maybe it was the way her eyes told him not to be afraid. She led him into a collapsed building, crawling through the dust until they reached a narrow space beneath the floorboards. She pushed him inside first, then squeezed in after him. The sound of boots and snarling voices grew louder outside. The boy froze, holding his breath. The girl pressed a finger to her lips. They sat in silence, hearts pounding, as shadows passed over cracks in the wall. The raiders searched, overturning debris. At one point, a clawed hand reached into the gap, brushing against the boy's foot. He bit down on his own hand to keep from making a sound. The girl didn't move, her gaze fixed and calm, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the voices faded. The girl exhaled slowly, then turned to him. She pulled a small piece of cloth from her pocket and began wiping the blood from his side. Her touch was careful, almost gentle. "You hurt," she said simply. He nodded, too exhausted to speak. She tore a strip from her own sleeve and tied it tightly around the wound. Then she handed him a small piece of something. Food, maybe. It was dry and bitter, but he ate it anyway. They sat there for a long time, listening to the distant chaos. Neither knew the other's language well, but it didn't matter. They didn't need words to understand what was happening. Two children in the middle of a war, hiding in the dark, keeping each other alive. When the sound of engines roared overhead, the boy recognized the deep hum, human transports. He struggled to his feet and crawled toward the light. She followed, stopping at the edge of the rubble. Outside, soldiers in human armor were sweeping the streets. One of them spotted him and ran forward, calling out. The boy turned back to the girl, his mouth open to say something, but before he could, a shout rang out behind her. A raider had seen her. Rough hands grabbed her arm and pulled her back. She didn't scream. She just looked at him, her silver eyes locking onto his, and in that silent moment, he felt something pass between them. A promise. He reached for her, but a soldier dragged him away, lifting him into their arms. As they carried him toward the transport, he twisted to look back. The last thing he saw was the girl being led away into the smoke. He didn't know her name, but he knew he owed her his life. And one day, he would come back for her. The hum of the ship's engines was steady, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Outside the viewing glass, stars drifted past in slow, endless rivers of light. Commander Darius Kane stood there, hands behind his back, watching the void. But his mind wasn't on the stars. It was on a pair of silver eyes from a lifetime ago. He had been 9 then. Now, 15 years later, he was a soldier in the human fleet, hardened, trained, and respected. But the memory of that day had never faded. Every battle, every mission, every quiet night between campaigns, he remembered the girl who had hidden him in the rubble, the girl who had risked her life without knowing his name. He never told anyone, not his fellow soldiers, not his commanding officers. It wasn't a story he could share. It was a debt, and debts had to be paid. The console behind him beeped. A young officer approached. "Commander, incoming transmission from Fleet Command. Priority Level 2. He turned from the glass and stepped to the console. The image flickered. showing Admiral Royce, a stern, gray-haired man with eyes like steel. Kane, you're being reassigned. Conflict on the outer colonies. We need someone fast, someone who can adapt on the ground. Darius's gaze sharpened. Which colony? Virilia Prime. The name hit him like a punch. He didn't move, but inside his pulse surged. That was her world. He had learned the name years ago through fragments of reports and stolen glances at classified maps. He had never had the chance to go there, until now. I'll take it, Darius said before the Admiral had even finished explaining the mission. The briefing was simple on paper. Assist in peacekeeping, protect human settlements, and ensure supply lines remained open. But Darius had his own mission. One fleet command would never know about. The journey to Virilia Prime took 4 days. He spent those nights in his quarters, studying every scrap of intel he could find on the planet. Images of its jagged mountains and violet skies filled the screen. He searched local population records, but the war had erased so much. Villages burned, names lost, histories buried under ash. Still, he would find her. If she was alive, he would find her. When the ship finally broke through Virilia's atmosphere, the view was a mix of beauty and scars. Fields of silver grass swayed under twin suns, but here and there, blackened craters marked where battles had torn the land apart. The city they landed in was a place of shadows, high walls, guarded gates, markets that fell silent when soldiers passed. The locals didn't look at him, or if they did, it was with suspicion. Humans were outsiders here, even when they came as allies. Darius kept his helmet off. He wanted them to see his face, to know he wasn't here to take from them. He began walking the narrow streets, ignoring the curious glances of his squad. "You looking for trouble, Commander?" one of his men muttered. "Just looking," Darius replied. He passed vendors selling strange fruits that shimmered in the light. He passed old women sitting on carved stone steps, their eyes like closed doors. And then he passed a group of children playing the dust, their laughter thin but real. It almost stopped him in his tracks, because for a moment he saw her there, as she had been all those years ago. But it was only a child with the same shade of silver eyes. That night, in the temporary barracks, he overheard 2 local workers speaking in their own language. His translator earpiece caught fragments, raiders taken years ago, working in the upper district. It was enough to make his chest tighten. The upper district was where the ruling faction lived, the ones who had taken her people and turned them into servants, laborers, or worse. If she had survived, and if she was there, it would not be easy to reach her. The district was heavily guarded. Unauthorized entry meant prison or death. Darius leaned back against the cold wall, his mind racing. He couldn't storm in, not without risking her life. He would have to get close another way. The next day, he volunteered for diplomatic escort duty, delivering supplies to the upper district's markets. It wasn't a direct path to the ruling compound, but it was a start. They passed through wide streets lined with tall, curved buildings. The air smelled of spiced oils and heated stone. Guards in black armor watched every movement. And in the crowd, he kept searching, face after face, looking for her eyes. Nothing. Hours later, as they were preparing to leave, he caught movement at the edge of the market. A young woman was walking with a basket balanced on her hip. Her clothes were plain, her head covered with a faded scarf. She didn't look at him, but as she passed, the sunlight caught her face, and for a heartbeat, silver eyes met his. It was her. He knew it instantly. The shape of her gaze, the way it held his without flinching, the same calm that stilled him in the rubble years ago. She didn't stop, didn't speak, just kept walking, disappearing into a side street. Darius's instinct screamed to follow, but the guard were already calling his name. He turned reluctantly, forcing himself to walk away. That night, he could barely sleep. The moment replayed in his mind, over and over. She was alive, and she was here. But something in her eyes had changed. Something heavy, guarded. The next morning, he left his unit with an excuse about scouting patrol routes. Alone, he slipped into a maze of streets where she had vanished. It took hours of asking quiet questions, speaking to vendors, offering small coins for harmless gossip. Finally, an old shopkeeper leaned close and said in a low voice, "If you care for your life, human, forget her. She belongs to them now." Darius's jaw tightened. "I don't forget." The shopkeeper shook his head. "Then you will both suffer." Darius walked away, his decision already made. He hadn't come all this way to turn back. He had promised. And promises were meant to be kept. The city of Aurelia Prime had two faces. The lower streets were crowded, worn, and restless. Markets full of barter and whispers. Homes stacked in narrow alleys. But the upper district was a fortress of wealth, guarded by tall walls and black-armored sentinels who never removed their helmets. Darius stood in the shadow of one of those walls, watching the gate. People came and went under strict inspection. Merchants, servants, officials. No one entered without reason. And she was somewhere inside. He had spent the last 2 days gathering information quietly, avoiding direct questions that might draw attention. The more he learned, the heavier the truth became. The girl, now a grown woman, was called Celine by those who knew her. She worked within the compound of the ruling faction, tending to the quarters of the overseer himself. The overseer was a man feared even by his own guards. Ruthless, calculating, known for breaking anyone who defied him. For Celine to be so close to him meant danger every day. But it also meant getting her out would be nearly impossible. Darius paced a narrow street, thinking. He couldn't storm the compound with just a handful of human soldiers. That would be a suicide mission. And if the overseer learned the human commander was looking for her, she might pay the price first. He needed to see her, to let her know he was here. And that meant doing something dangerous. That night, he slipped away from the barracks again. This time, he wore no armor, only local clothes he had bought from a vendor. A hood covered his face. He moved through the streets, blending in with the late-night crowd. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roasted grain from a nearby stall. He followed the path he had memorized from overheard servant chatter, the route the compound's workers used to exit after their duties. At this hour, they came in small groups, heading home before curfew. Darius waited in the shadows, his eyes scanning each face. Minutes passed. Then he saw her. Celine walked with two other women, their conversation low and quick. She kept her head slightly lowered, the faded scarf still covering her hair. But her eyes, those silver eyes, glanced up briefly, scanning the street. And this time they found him. She froze for half a heartbeat. He didn't move. Their gaze locked, a silent bridge across years. Then she looked away and kept walking. Darius fell into step several paces behind, careful not to draw attention. They turned down a quieter street, the noise of the market fading. One of the women split off into a side alley. The other walked on until Celine murmured something, and she too left without question. Now she was alone. Darius closed the distance until they were only a few steps apart. "Celine," he said softly. She stopped, turned slowly, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he saw her face clearly. The years had changed her. The roundness of childhood replaced by sharp grace, her gaze steady but carrying a weight he could feel. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Her voice was low, but there was no fear in it, only warning. "You saved me once," he replied. "I came back." A faint smile touched her lips, but it vanished almost instantly. "And now you'll get yourself killed." She glanced around the empty street. "If they see you speaking to me, it'll be both of us." "I had to find you," he said. "I couldn't leave it the way it was." Her eyes softened for a moment, and he saw the girl from the rubble again, but then her shoulders stiffened. "This is not the time. I can't leave. Not yet." "Why?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I am not just surviving here. I am working for something bigger. There are people inside the compound who trust me, people who want the overseer gone. If I vanish now, the hope they will vanish too." Darius frowned. "You're part of the resistance." Her lips pressed together. She didn't confirm, but her silence was answer enough. He wanted to argue, to tell her she had done enough, that she didn't need to risk herself anymore. But before he could speak, the sound of boots echoed from the far end of the street. Two guards in black armor were approaching. Celine's hand shot out, gripping his sleeve. Go. Now. I can protect you. No, she cut in firmly. You'll only draw their eyes. Meet me here in 3 nights. If I don't come, then you leave this place and never look back. He shook his head. Not a chance. Her expression softened. Just for an instant, you never did listen. The boots grew louder. She stepped back, turning away from him. By the time the guards passed, she was just another servant walking toward the gates. Darius melted into the shadows, watching until she disappeared inside. When he finally returned to the barracks, the night felt colder than before. He had found her, spoken to her, and now he knew she was tangled in something dangerous, something that could swallow them both. But he also knew one thing for certain. If she thought he would walk away, she didn't know him at all. The next 3 days were endless. Darius went through his duties with mechanical precision, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Celine's words, her steady gaze, the warning in her voice. She was part of something dangerous, something bigger than just survival. And now that he knew, there was no going back. On the 3rd night, he slipped away again. The streets were quieter than before, shadows pooling under the dim street lamps. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke from distant fires, a reminder that the planet's peace was fragile, held together by fear. He reached the narrow street where they had spoken before and waited. Every sound made his hand twitch toward the concealed pistol under his coat. Minutes stretched into an hour, and doubt began to gnaw at him. Maybe she couldn't come. Maybe the guards had. A soft step behind him made him turn. She was there. Same plain clothes, same faded scarf. But this time she moved with purpose. Follow me, she said quietly. He obeyed without question. They wound through twisting alleys until they reached a small courtyard, empty except for a half-collapsed fountain. Celine stopped there, scanning the shadows before facing him. You should have left, she said. And break my promise, he replied. Her lips curved, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. You were a child then. I didn't expect you to remember. I remembered every day, Darius said simply. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then she stepped closer. If you stay, you'll have to accept the risk. I can't protect you from what's coming. I'm not here to be protected, he said. I'm here to help. Celine studied him, her gaze searching. You're human. The Overseer's faction hates humans. If they find out you're working with us, it will give them an excuse to tighten their grip. Then we make sure they don't find out, Darius said. You're part of a resistance. Tell me what you need. She hesitated, then pulled a folded scrap of paper from her sleeve. It was a crude map, not a whole city, but of a section inside the upper district. Several points were marked in red. These are guard patrol routes, she said. 2 nights from now, a shipment of weapons will arrive for the Overseer. If we intercept it before it enters a compound, we can arm more of our people. Where do I come in? He asked. You have clearance to move through the markets without suspicion. You can position yourself here. She tapped a point on the map and create a distraction, long enough for my people to take the shipment and vanish. Darius studied the map. That's risky. If the guards connect me to the theft, you'll be reassigned off-world, she said flatly. Or worse. He looked up from the map. And if it fails? Her eyes darkened. Then more of my people die, and we lose our only chance in months to push back. Darius didn't need to think about it. I'm in. She gave a small nod, folding the map and tucking it away. Meet me here tomorrow night. I'll introduce you to the others. Before she could turn to leave, he said, Celine, why didn't you run all those years ago? After you saved me? She froze, her back to him, because if I had run, no one else would have been left to fight for them. And then she was gone into the shadows. The following night, he returned to the courtyard. This time, Celine wasn't alone. 2 figures emerged from the shadows with her, a tall, scarred alien male with deep green skin, and a younger woman with sharp eyes and quick movements. This is Kale and Mira, Celine said. They've been with me since the beginning. Kale eyed Darius with open distrust. You're human. Why risk yourself for us? Darius met his gaze steadily. Because one of you risked herself for me when I was a child. I owe a debt. Mira tilted her head. Debts are dangerous things in war. They're also the only thing that keeps some of us moving, Darius said. Celine cut him before Kale could reply. Enough. He's with us for the next mission. You'll treat him like one of our own. Kale's jaw tightened, but he gave a short nod. They spent the next hour going over the plan in detail. The shipment would arrive under heavy guard, escorted by armored carriers. The Resistance's job was to strike fast, grab the crates, and vanish before the Overseer's forces could react. Darius's role was simple in theory. Draw attention away from the ambush site. In practice, it meant putting himself in the direct path of the guards. When the meeting ended, Celine walked with him to the edge of the courtyard. You don't have to prove yourself, she said quietly. This isn't about proving anything, Darius replied. It's about keeping my promise. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Then she stepped back. Be ready. Tomorrow night, everything changes. The next day was heavy with tension. Darius kept his movements normal, speaking to his squad, handling routine patrols. But every step, every glance, felt sharper. The wrong move could expose everything. When night came, he slipped into the market alone. The air was thick with the scent of spice and smoke. Merchants were packing up their stalls, and the streets were thinning. He positioned himself near the point Celine had marked, leaning casually against a stone wall. In the distance, the low rumble of engines grew louder. The shipment was coming. A convoy of armored vehicles rolled into view, their black metal glinting under the street lamps. Guards marched alongside, weapons ready. The lead vehicle slowed as it approached the narrow section of street. Darius stepped forward. Halt! This street's under security inspection, he called in a commanding voice. His human uniform, worn under his cloak, was just visible enough to lend authority. The guards hesitated, exchanging glances. That was the moment Celine's team struck. From the shadows, Kale and Myra's fighters swarmed the rear of the convoy, silent and fast. Darius kept shouting orders, forcing the lead guard to focus on him. A muffled thud sounded, the rear cargo latch breaking open. Crates slid out into waiting hands. The fighters vanished into side alleys like smoke. One of the guards finally realized what was happening. It's a diversion, he shouted. Weapons rose, turning toward the rear. Darius moved first, shoving one guard hard enough to send him sprawling, then ducking into a side street. Blaster fire scorched the wall where his head had been. By the time the convoy reorganized, the shipment was gone. Later, in the safety of a hidden cellar, Celine handed him a small canteen of water. You bought us time, she said. And weapons. You said everything would change, Darius replied. She nodded, her eyes steady. Now it begins. The air in Virelia Prime felt different the next day. Quieter. Heavier. Darius could sense it even before he left the barracks. People in the streets moved faster, keeping their heads down. Market stalls opened late, their owners glancing over their shoulders more than usual. The smell of smoke carried on the wind, not from cooking fires, but from burning buildings. Celine's warning echoed in his mind. Now it begins. The Overseer's response was swift. Entire neighborhoods were locked down. Soldiers in black armor patrolled in groups of 10, kicking in doors, dragging people into the streets for questioning. They were looking for the thieves, for her resistance. Darius moved through the city with care, his human uniform giving him a thin shield of authority. But it also drew eyes, and those eyes carried suspicion. When night came, he slipped away again, making his way to the hidden cellar where they had met after the raid. Celine was already there, along with Kale, Mira, and half a dozen others. The air was thick with tension. They're closing in, Kale said, slamming his fist on the table. 3 of ours are already gone. Take them before they could reach safety. Myra's voice was sharp. The Overseer will burn the city to find us. We can't stay hidden. We have to hit back before he tightens a noose. Celine listened quietly before speaking. He expects us to scatter. That's why we won't. Tomorrow night, we strike at one of the supply hubs. Without food and fuel, his grip weakens. Darius studied the map she rolled out. That's in the lower district. It's more open. You'll have less cover. That's why you'll be there, she said, meeting his eyes. Your presence will distract any patrols. You're the only one who can move openly without being searched. Kale's expression was still doubtful, but no one argued. They didn't have time for doubt. The following night, the plan unfolded. The lower district was alive with noise, a mix of drunken laughter from taverns and the hum of late-night merchants. Darius walked ahead of the group, his steps casual, his gaze scanning for trouble. Behind him, in the shadows, Celine and the others moved toward the supply hub. The building was heavily guarded, its high walls topped with spike metal. Inside, the overseer stored crates of preserved food, barrels of water, and fuel cells for his patrol ships. Darius approached a pair of guards at the outer gate, producing a forged fleet pass. "Inspection orders," he said, his tone flat and official. One guard frowned but waved him through. The moment he was inside, he veered toward a side walkway, glancing toward the shadows where Celine's team slipped through a gap in the wall. It went smoothly for the first 5 minutes. Too smoothly. Then the alarm sounded. Red lights flared across the compound. Guards shouted, rushing toward the storage area where Kale and Mira were already loading crates. Darius drew his pistol, firing 2 quick shots to scatter the nearest patrol. Celine darted past him, slamming a detonator onto a locked door. The blast shook the air, throwing heat against their faces. "Move!" she shouted. They hauled what they could, pushing carts toward the gap in the wall. But more guards poured in, blocking the way. Blaster fire lit the night, burning holes into crates and sending sparks across the ground. Darius stepped forward, putting himself between the guards and the others. His shots were precise, dropping enemies without wasting a second. But they kept coming. One blast grazed his arm, burning through cloth and skin. He gritted his teeth and kept firing. Celine was the last to leave. She locked eyes with him for a split second, a look that said she wouldn't leave him behind. But when another squad closed in from the rear, he shouted, "Go!" She hesitated, then ran, disappearing into the dark with the others. Darius ducked behind a metal crate as blaster bolts tore through the air above him. He sprinted toward a side gate, firing over his shoulder. A guard lunged at him with a blade, but he sidestepped and drove an elbow into the man's helmet, sending him sprawling. By the time he reached the street, the supply hub was in flames. The heat rolled off it like a living thing. People in the lower district were pouring from their homes, staring at the smoke and fire. Some looked shocked, others hopeful. He limped into an alley, his injured arm throbbing. Moments later, Celine emerged from the shadows. She was breathing hard, a streak of soot on her cheek. Without a word, she grabbed his good arm and pulled him deeper into the maze of streets. When they finally reached the cellar, the others were waiting. The crates they had taken were stacked against the wall. Safe. Kale's expression was grim, but his voice carried a note of respect. "You bought us enough time to get out. We owe you." Darius shook his head. "You owe me nothing. I'm here because of her." Celine met his gaze, and for a moment, the noise of the room faded. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes told him she understood exactly what he meant. That night, he couldn't sleep. The flames of the supply hub burned in his memory. But so did the faces of the people watching from the shadows, their expressions shifting from fear to something like courage. The resistance was growing, and that meant the overseer's next move would be even more dangerous. The overseer did not waste time. By sunrise, the city was locked down tighter than ever before. Black armored soldiers stood at every corner, scanning the streets with cold, unblinking eyes. Doors were ripped from hinges. Families were dragged into the open. Anyone suspected of helping the resistance vanished into the upper district cells. Word reached Darius by midday. Kale and 2 others had been taken. Mira had barely escaped. She arrived at the hidden cellar pale and shaking, her arm bruised and her voice raw. "They knew exactly where we'd be," she said, pacing the room. "They're not guessing anymore. Someone inside is feeding them information." Celine's jaw tightened. Kale won't last long under their questioning. If they break him, they'll know everything, Darius finished. The room went silent. Everyone knew what that meant. If the overseer learned the full extent of the Resistance's network, it would be over, not just for them, but for hundreds of people depending on them for protection and supplies. "We go in tonight," Celine said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "We get them out before the overseer can make an example of them." Mira stared at her. "The upper district prison is a fortress. Even if we get in, how do we get out?" Celine's gaze shifted to Darius. "We'll have help." They met in a dark corner of the lower district's old transport yard. Darius had called in a favor from a human contact in the fleet, a smuggler who knew how to move unnoticed. The man, a grizzled veteran named Rook, arrived with a narrow cargo hauler disguised as a food transport. "Never thought I'd see you on this rock, Kane," Rook said, lowering his voice. "And never thought you'd be the one asking for a prison break." "Things change," Darius replied. "I need you to get us in weight and get us out fast." Rook smirked. "You've got 3 hours before I have to disappear. After that, you're on your own." The plan was brutal in its simplicity. The hauler would pass through the prison's lower loading gate under the guise of delivering rations. Celine, Darius, and Mira would be inside the cargo compartment, hidden among crates. Once inside, they would split, Mira to disable the security grid, Darius and Celine to find Kale and the others. The hauler rumbled toward the upper district, its engine a low growl under the night sky. Inside the cramped cargo bay, the air was warm and heavy. Celine sat opposite Darius, her knees drawn up. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "You don't have to do this." He met her gaze. "We've had this conversation before. I'm not leaving you to fight alone." Her eyes softened for a moment before she looked away. "If we fail, they'll make sure we're never seen again." "Then we don't fail," he said. The prison loomed ahead, a massive block of black stone and metal, its walls lined with electric barriers. Searchlights swept the yard, and the air smelled faintly of ozone from the power lines. The hauler rolled up to the gate. Guards scanned it quickly, their eyes barely glancing at the driver's manifest. Rook's voice was steady, casual, as he handed it over. The gate opened. Once inside, the hauler backed into a dimly lit loading bay. The moment the doors closed behind them, Darius and Celine slipped out, keeping to the shadows. Mira darted down a side corridor, her hands already working at the small hacking device on her wrist. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The walls were bare, the only sound hum of energy barriers and the distant clang of metal doors. Celine stopped at a corner, peering down a hallway lined with cells. "Kale's in there," she whispered. Darius checked the nearest guard patrol, 2 soldiers moving in slow, deliberate steps. When they passed, he and Celine slipped forward, pressing against the cell's control panel. Celine worked quickly, bypassing the lock with a stolen guard key. The door slid open. Kale stepped out, his face bruised but his eyes burning. "Took you long enough," he muttered. "Can you walk?" Darius asked. Kale nodded. "Get the others first." They moved down the row, freeing the 2 other captured fighters. But as they reached the last cell, an alarm wailed, high-pitched and sharp. Myra's voice crackled in Darius's earpiece. "Sorry, they've got a secondary system I couldn't override. You got 2 minutes before every guard in the building is on you. Move!" Darius barked. They ran, boots pounding the cold floor. Shouts echoed from behind as guards poured into the corridors. Blaster fire lit the halls, bolts slamming into walls and scattering sparks. Darius took the lead, covering their retreat, while Celine guided them toward the loading bay. Kale stumbled once, and Celine caught his arm, dragging him forward. They burst into the bay just as Rook fired up the hauler's engine. "Get in," he shouted. The group piled into the back, slamming the door shut. The hauler lurched forward, tearing out of the bay as alarms blared across the compound. Searchlights swung wildly, but the narrow transport was already vanishing into the streets. An hour later, they were back in the lower district, the stolen fighters safe in a hidden warehouse. The air inside was thick with relief, but it was short-lived. "They'll come harder now," Kale said grimly. "They know we can reach them anywhere." Celine glanced at Darius. "Then we make the next move before they do." The overseer's wrath shook the city. For 2 days, soldiers stormed the streets, raiding homes, tearing through markets, and striking fear into every corner of Aurelia Prime. But fear could only last so long. The people had seen the resistance break into the prison and walk out alive. Whispers spread like wildfire. The overseer was not untouchable. In the hidden warehouse, Celine stood over a table covered in maps. Her hands were steady, but her eyes burned with urgency. "This is it," she said. "We take the fight to him before he can rebuild. If we end him now, the city will be free." Kale crossed his arms. "His compound is a fortress. Even with the weapons we've taken, we'll be outnumbered." Darius leaned over the table, studying the layout. "Then we don't fight on his terms. We draw him out." Celine looked at him. "How?" Darius tapped the map. "He only leave the compound for one reason, to show power. We hit his patrol ships on the landing platform. He'll come to see the destruction himself. And when he does, we'll be waiting." The room went quiet. Then Kale gave a slow nod. It could work. The night of the strike, the city was silent under a blanket of clouds. Rain slicked the stone streets, turning the lights into shimmering blurs. The resistance moved like shadows through the alleys, their weapons hidden beneath cloaks. From the edge of the landing platform, Darius could see the overseer's sleek black ships resting under heavy guard. They gleamed like predators waiting to pounce. "Positions," Celine whispered. The team fanned out. Mira slipped to the control tower, her hands already working to override the security locks. Kale and the fighters took cover near the fuel lines. Darius stood beside Celine, both watching the patrol pattern. When the last guard turned his back, Kale gave the signal. Explosions ripped through the platform, tearing through the first 2 ships in a bloom of fire. The shockwave rattled the ground, sending guards scrambling in every direction. And just as Darius had predicted, the overseer came. He arrived in a personal escort craft, stepping out in black ceremonial armor, flanked by his elite guard. His voice boomed over chaos. "Who dares?" A single shot cracked through the air. One of his guards fell. Then the resistance poured out from the shadows. The fight was fast and brutal. Blaster fire lit the rain, streaking red and white across the platform. The overseer moved like a predator, striking down 2 fighters with a blade that hummed with energy. Darius met him head-on. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. The overseer was strong, but Darius was faster, his movements sharp and precise. Years of training and the fire of his promise pushed him forward. Celine cut down 2 guards trying to flank Darius. She fought with the same calm she'd had as a child in the rubble, steady, fearless. Every strike measured. The overseer snarled, pressing his attack. "You think you can save them, human? They are mine." "They were never yours," Darius growled, driving back with a flurry of strikes. A blast from Kale's rifle took down the overseer's last guard. Darius saw his opening. With a final, decisive blow, he disarmed the overseer, sending his blade skidding across the platform. Celine stepped forward, her eyes locked on the man who had ruled her people through fear. "Your reign ends tonight." The overseer lunged in desperation, but Celine was faster. Her blade struck true, and the tyrant fell to his knees before collapsing on the rain-slick ground. For a moment, silence filled the platform. Then, slowly, the people watching from the shadows began to emerge. Workers, merchants, families. Their voices rose, first in disbelief, then in cheers. The overseer's banner was torn down, replaced by the symbol of the resistance. Kale turned to Darius, his voice rough. "The city is yours now, Celine." Celine shook her head. "It's ours." Later, as the first light of dawn broke over Aurelia Prime, Darius and Celine stood on the high steps of the compound, looking out over the city. The air was cool, the rain gone, and for the first time in years, the streets were free of armed patrols. "You could go home now," Celine said softly. Darius looked at her. "I am home." She studied him for a moment, then asked, "Why risk everything after all these years?" He smiled faintly. "Because once a girl saved my life. She didn't know my name. She didn't ask for anything. But I promised I'd come back for her. And I keep my promises. Her expression softened, and for the first time, she let the weight in her eyes lift. Then stay. We'll rebuild together. Darius extended his hand. She took it without hesitation. And as the sun rose over the city, they stood side by side, no longer just a boy and girl from the rubble, but the leaders of a free world, bound by a promise that had finally been kept. The fall of the overseer should have been the end. Instead, it was only the beginning. 3 days after the victory, the streets of Aurelia Prime were alive with noise. Not a fear, but debate. Merchants argued in the markets. Workers shouted from rooftops. Families gathered in the squares to speak openly for the first time in years. Freedom had come suddenly, and now everyone wanted to decide what came next. But freedom also brought trouble. Without the overseer's iron grip, old rivalries between clans began to resurface. Armed men and women roamed the streets in the colors of their houses. Tensions rose. One wrong move could send the city into chaos. Inside the old overseer's compound, now the Resistance's headquarters, Celine sat at the long council table. Maps, reports, and letters covered its surface. Around her sat Kale, Mira, and a half-dozen representatives from the largest clans. Darius stood behind her, watching and listening. "This city needs order," one of the clan leaders said, his tone sharp. "My people have the strength to protect it. We should lead." Another leader scoffed. "Your people will protect it for yourselves." We all know what that means. A new overseer in different armor. The room grew tense. Celine raised her hand. "No one will rule alone. We will form a council. Equal voices, equal votes." The first leader slammed his palm on the table. "And who decided that?" "I did," Celine said calmly, her silver eyes locking on his. "Because if we keep fighting for power, the people will lose the very thing we fought for." There was murmured agreement from some, but not from all. Later, in the courtyard, Darius caught Celine staring up at the walls. "They're not ready to follow one leader," he said quietly. "They're not ready for peace either," she replied. "The overseer's gone, but the poison he spread is still here." He studied her for a moment. "Then we make sure it doesn't grow again." Before she could answer, Mira rushed in, breathless. "We have a problem." 2 supply convoys bound for the outer villages were ambushed. Survivors say the attackers wore resistance colors. Celine's brow furrowed. "That's not possible. We wouldn't." Darius cut in, his voice low. "Someone's trying to frame you." That night, they moved quietly through the lower district, following the trail left by the attackers. The streets were wet from an earlier rain, reflecting the dull glow of street lamps. In a half-collapsed warehouse, they found the stolen supplies stacked neatly in the corner, and standing guard over them was a man Darius recognized, one of the resistance fighters who had fought beside them at the landing platform. Celine stepped forward. "Why?" The man's eyes darted between her and Darius. It wasn't personal. "The clans are moving, Celine. They want control before you take it. I was told to make you look weak." "By who?" Darius asked. The man hesitated. "A council member." Celine's jaw tightened. "Name." The man swallowed. "Lord Tarvek." Back at the compound, Kale paced the council chamber. "If Tarvek's moving against you, he won't stop here. He'll push the other clans to side with him." Celine nodded. "Then we end it before he can start." "How?" Darius asked. She turned to him. "By forcing him to show his hand." The next day, Celine called for a full council meeting. Word spread fast, and by midday, the Great Hall was crowded. Not only with clan leaders, but with citizens eager to hear what was next. Celine stood at the center. 3 days ago, we won our freedom together. But now, someone seeks to break that unity. Convoys to our people were attacked. The attackers wore our colors. Gasps and murmurs filled the hall. "I know who gave the order," she continued. "Lord Tarvek." Tarvek stood slowly, a cold smile on his face. Strong words. "But where is your proof?" Darius stepped forward, holding a small recording device. The man from the warehouse had confessed on tape, his voice clear in the hall. The crowd erupted. Some shouted for Tarvek's arrest. Others demanded a trial. Selene raised her voice. We will not replace one tyrant with another. Tarvek will face justice, but by the will of the people, not the blade of one. The hall roared in approval. Tarvek was escorted out, his face pale but his eyes promising trouble. That night, Darius and Selene stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The fires in the streets were small, cooking fires, not burning buildings. But far beyond the walls, in the dark hills, faint lights moved. Those aren't villages. Darius said quietly, that's an army. Selene's gaze was steady. The overseer had allies off-world. Without him, they'll want to claim what's left, and they'll come for us. Darius looked at her, the weight of the coming fight settling in his chest. Then it's not over. No, she agreed. It's only just begun. The enemy came with the dawn, from the hills beyond the city. Ships descended in tight formation, their black hulls reflecting the pale sunlight. The sound of their engines rolled over Virilia Prime like distant thunder. By the time the first landed, the streets were already in chaos. Families ran for shelter. Fighters scrambled to the walls. Selene stood on the high steps of the old overseer's compound, her silver eyes fixed on the horizon. They came faster than I thought. Beside her, Darius adjusted the strap on his rifle. They'd been waiting for this moment. The overseer's fall gave them an opening. Kale rushed up the steps, out of breath. We've counted 6 landing craft so far. Could be hundreds of troops. And their weapons, they're heavier than anything the overseer's guards carried. Selene turned to Darius. If they take the city, everything we fought for dies here. Then we make sure they don't, he replied. The council chamber became a war room. Maps were unrolled. Messengers came and went. Resistance fighters, clan warriors, and even former overseer guards willing to switch sides filled the hall. For the first time, every faction stood in the same room. Without shouting, Selene spoke clearly, her voice carrying over the crowd. This is not about clans or sides anymore. This is about Virilia. If we fall here, we fall together. Mira moved between groups, distributing weapons from their stolen stockpiles. Kale coordinated with the wall guards, setting up heavy blasters at choke points. Darius oversaw the outer defenses, his voice calm but firm as he positioned fighters where they could hold the line longest. By midday, the enemy's first wave began. Columns of black-armored soldiers marched to the outer streets, their boots pounding in unison. They fired without warning, forcing civilians into hiding, the air filled with the acrid smell of burning metal and stone. Darius fought the northern gate, his rifle snapping out precise shots. Every time a soldier fell, another moved to take their place. Selene commanded from the center, her voice steady over the comms. Hold your ground. Don't let them push past the market square. For hours, the line held. But then the enemy brought out something new. Walking siege mechs, tower machines armed with heavy cannons. One blast from them tore through an entire barricade, sending fighters scattering. Fall back to the second line. Darius ordered, covering retreat with bursts of fire. He could feel the ground shake under the mech steps. In the chaos, a runner reached Selene. The east wall is collapsing. We can't hold much longer. Selene's jaw clenched. Darius, we need to pull them into the upper district. Narrower streets will slow the mechs. On it, he said, signaling his fighters. The retreat was brutal. They moved street by street, holding long enough for civilians to get through the inner gates before falling back again. By the time they reached the upper district, the city's outer edges were lost, smoke curling into the sky. Night fell, but the enemy did not stop. Fires lit the streets with an eerie glow, casting long shadows on the cracked walls. Darius found Selene near the council steps, checking the power supply for the last defense grid. You need rest, he told her. So, do you, she replied, but neither of them moved. He looked at her for a moment. If we don't make it. She cut him off sharply. We will. Then, softer. But if we don't, know that I never forgot that day. You were a boy, and I thought I'd never see you again. Yet you came back. And I'm not leaving now, he said. Before dawn, the enemy launched their final push. The mechs led the charge, blasting through the remaining gates. The sound of battle echoed through the upper district's narrow streets. Fighters screamed orders. Blaster fire lit the sky. Kale was wounded in the first minutes, dragged back to safety by Mira. The line began to buckle. Celine fought at Darius's side, her blade flashing in the firelight. Together, they pushed back wave after wave, but the numbers kept coming. A blast caught Darius in the side, knocking him to one knee. Celine was there instantly, her hand gripping his arm. "Stay with me?" He forced himself to his feet, pain burning through him. Not done yet. At the last barricade, they made their stand. Every fighter, every weapon, every scrap of courage was thrown into the fight. The streets shook with the force of it, and slowly, against the odds, the enemy began to falter. When the first of their ships pulled back, a cheer rose from the defenders. The second ship followed, then the third. By mid-morning, the black-armored army was retreating, leaving the burning streets behind. But the victory had a price. Dozens lay dead. Many more were wounded. The city's outer districts were in ruins. Celine stood in the square, blood and soot streaking her face. Around her, the people gathered, not cheering this time, but watching quietly, as if realizing freedom was heavier than they imagined. Darius limped to her side. She looked at him, and for a moment, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "We kept it. Against everything, we kept it." He nodded slowly. "At cost." Her gaze didn't waver. Freedom always has won. The battle was over, but the city still felt wounded. Smoke drifted from the ruins of the outer districts. Streets were scattered with broken stone, scorched metal, and the quiet bodies of those who had fought. The sound of hammers and shovels replaced the clash of weapons. For 3 days, no one spoke of politics. Every able hand worked to clear the debris, carry water, or care for the injured. Celine moved from street to street, speaking to families, organizing repairs, and making sure no one was left behind. Darius stayed close, helping where he could, lifting beams, hauling supplies, and, when needed, standing guard so that the workers could feel safe. His side still ached from a wound, but he refused to slow down. One evening, they stood together on the high wall, looking out over the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep violet. Celine's voice was quiet. "We held them back. But now comes the harder part. Rebuilding?" Darius asked. She nodded. "Freedom is fragile. If we don't build something strong, all of this will be lost again. The clans still mistrust each other. And there will be more enemies, out there in the dark, waiting for us to stumble." Darius studied her face, the silver in her eyes catching the last light. "You're going to lead them." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Not alone. That's what destroyed the Overseer, ruling without others to keep him in check. We'll form a true council with voices from every district. And," she hesitated, "I want you on it." He shook his head. "I'm a soldier, not a politician." "You're a man who keeps his word," she said softly. "That's worth more than titles." The first council meeting was held in the open square, so every citizen could see. The clan leaders took their seats beside merchants, farmers, and former overseer guards who had pledged loyalty to the new order. Celine stood at the center, her voice carrying across the crowd. "This council belongs to all of Aurelia. No single voice will decide the fate of the many. We are free because we fought together, and we will remain free the same way." There was cautious applause at first, then stronger, until the whole square echoed with it. When the meeting ended, Kale clapped Darius on the shoulder. "You may not like politics, human, but you just became part of the city's spine." That night, Celine found Darius in the quiet of the old Overseer's war room, now stripped of its banners. He was looking at the empty wall, where the enemy's map had once hung. "You could leave now," she said, stepping beside him. "The fleet would take you back. No one would blame you." He turned to her, his voice steady. "When I was 9, I thought I'd never see you again. But I made myself a promise that day. I told myself I'd come back, no matter how long it took. I'm not going to break it now." Celine's eyes softened. "So what happens next?" He smiled faintly. "We rebuild. We protect. And if trouble comes again, we face it together. She extended her hand. He took it without hesitation, the grip firm, the same way she had once pulled him into the rubble all those years ago. Weeks passed, and slowly, Virelia began to change. Markets reopened. Children laughed in the streets again. The walls were repaired, stronger than before. And on the highest tower of the compound, a new banner flew. Not the symbol of any one clan, but a circle of silver and gold representing unity. Darius stood on that tower one morning, watching the city breathe again. Celine joined him, her steps quiet but sure. "It's strange," she said, "to wake up and not expect a fight." "Enjoy it," Darius replied. "We earned it." She looked at him, a small smile touching her lips. "You kept your promise." He nodded. "And I'll keep it every day I'm here." Together, they turned toward the sunrise, the light spilling over the city they fought for, no longer just a boy and girl from the rubble, but two leaders bound not by chance, but by choice, and by a promise that would never break.